I got the floor now then, Q.
Yep, just a really quick item just to take note of. If you do have questions as we go through, feel free to put those through in the questions panel there. That's in the go-to webinar thing. And then this webinar is being recorded, so you'll have access to it afterwards. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started.
Terrific. Thank you, Q. Hey, first thing that I want to do, before I get into my slideshow, is I want to go in so that you can see this kind of full circle as we're discussing things. So we're gonna do some technical things without me really explaining what I'm doing. I'll explain a little bit of it. But of course, this webinar is about Retain and backing up Retain, quite frankly, mirroring and disaster recovery solutions for Retain 2. But the first thing that I want to do so that you can see this kind of full circle is I'm going to log into an account, generate an email right in front of you so that it doesn't look like any kind of trickery, okay? So here is a message on 1/26/2017 at 12:06 Mountain. Okay, all right, so there we go. So there's the message, there we go, and I'm going to attach some random file. Gee, I don't know, I'll just go here and blah, 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 and go here, okay, and we're going to just, a little Python script there, all right? Okay, so bink, we send that, okay? Now, of course, now we're going to go into Retain here. This is the same user that I sent it as, okay? And I'm going to go into their mailbox, and this is a test message I did earlier today at 10:03, and obviously this item is not going. This item that here's this message. This is not going to be in there because it hasn't been dredged out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside of Retain. I'm going to go to my schedule here, and I'm just going to jiggle the handle here, save the changes, and I'm going to go over to the worker, and I'm going to say refresh job cache now. Again, those of you who use Retain, this should be probably a little bit understandable to you. What I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, Retain, dredge it now, okay, because I want to get the item into the Retain system, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to perform a backup. And of course, the demo gods, I did not pay them enough because, oh, you know what? It already ran. Sorry. So no, it didn't run. No. Okay. I'm going to go here. Try this again. Okay. Jiggle the handle. Save the changes. Go to the worker, and go to here. Refresh job cache now. Go to status, and let this tick down. And my goal is for this to indicate that 12:08 or whatever that it ran. Gee, wouldn't it? So I'm now running into a technical problem with Retain, and I have no idea why. And so you are just going to have to trust me that usually this works in Retain, and then I was going to show you me doing a backup. So, well, I don't want to get into that too much, so we'll just see if that maybe ends up running here. It would have been neat to show you that we could, have that replicate to our, offsite Retain systems, and I'll show all that to you, but we can't demonstrate that at this moment. There's some little technical problem in Retain. Okay, so let's come back here, and let's view our slideshow. And let's talk about reload for Retain. Now, here's how I got going with this. So I created a software called Reload. It's a backup solution for Novell GroupWise, but also it's now a backup for Retain. And the reason I got involved in this is I got a good friend out at a big bank back east, and he said, hey, you know what? We've got Retain. They love Retain, but the problem was they needed to get backups. The requirements as a bank is they're supposed to be getting a backup every 48 hours, and and it says here 24, but I just recently learned it's every 48 hours. But they were now, approaching 40 hours to get their backups each time. Each backup iteration was taking 40 hours to back up their retain system, and they felt like pretty soon they were going to fall out of compliance, and they were very concerned with that. And so, and not only that, but the backup routine, and I remember watching this, they had this backup solution that, was pretty nifty. I mean, it was excellent software and so forth, but it would, really hit the disk hard, a lot of CPU cycles and so forth. And so what they did was they said, you know what, we really think there's a better way to back up retain. And the gentleman's name is Willem, and he said, hey, here's how you do it. The very first time, back up retain like everyone else does, and then every other time you reach in the database and you find from the database what you need to back up instead of having to search around on disk like all other backup solutions have to do. And so sure enough, he was right, and we architected that for United Bank. Their backup takes less than an hour, quite a bit less typically, about half an hour typically. Their backups are taking for retain. So that was the primary reason behind reload for the retain. The other key features of reload for retain is push button disaster recovery, okay, and that's new to version 2.0. Retain server mirroring. So this same bank, okay, their data's not only be backed up, but it's being mirrored to a backup location that's on-site, and then a backup location in another state. Now when I say mirroring, this is the idea, okay? It's the idea as soon as something comes into retain, within less than 5 minutes, the data will be replicated, bink, to the retain system that's hosted on the reload server, that's on-site, and also simultaneously, well, practically simultaneously, to the reload, and retain system that's in another state. Okay, so very, very powerful, very important for entities such as banks and other organizations where they're really, really serious about the retain implementation. Now, another cool feature is if you've got MySQL, we will not only back up that database for you. Now, we don't back up MSSQL or Oracle because, quite frankly, there's no need to. There's wonderful solutions out there for it. But if you're on MySQL, we'll dump that database from your retain system, and then when it gets over to the reload server, if you turn on this feature, it'll import that database into a completely separate instance over on the reload server. So imagine this, in a disaster recovery scenario, instead of going, oh yeah, I know they're backing it up, and it's this dump, and we're going to import that in, that'll take 12 hours, and meanwhile you have 12 hours of downtime and so forth. You can have reload for retain automatically every night, or whatever your interval is, be importing that in over on your retain system that's hosted on the reload server. So super powerful. And in that kind of scenario, it's very easy to use. You could use your backup server for many of your retain tasks instead of your production server, which is doing the dredging and so forth. So just some thoughts, but very, very powerful features. Okay, so first off, another problem that we ran into here in support was we keep finding that there's tons of people who aren't even backing up their retain system. Okay, I've heard, and I can see why people say this. Say, well, retain is the backup, right? And that's understandable. They're right in a lot of ways. Retain is kind of like a backup solution for whatever it is that you're archiving off. But then I pose the question, okay, great. What if you were to lose your retain system? Oh, wow, yeah, that'd be bad, so, or we have VMware, so it's backed up. Really? Have you looked at that? Have you actually tried to stitch that together? How's that work? A lot of times people think that with a VM, they've got it all worked out, and quite frankly, it's a rather elegant solution that you have to put together, and if you haven't put that together, you don't have a good backup of your retain system, and it's certainly not a push-button disaster recovery solution. Or it's on a SAN and so it's backed up. Okay, so some of your data is backed up. Are you sure that all those blob files are backed up? So can you challenge your backup? That's a major theme is how easily. Okay, so you do have disparate systems backing up disparate data and so forth, but how easily can you go in and access a backup? I'm going to show you we can access a backup of a retained system in a matter of just a couple of minutes and easily challenge it, and over on the retained system that is hosted on our reload server. Okay. So let's talk about the architecture of retain so you can kind of understand what the challenge is behind backing up retain. Okay, so there's really three components to retain. Maybe I should put in a fourth component, and that's the software. But when we look at the data, there's the database, and that's the metadata. If you lose your database, you're toast. Doesn't matter all the other nifty stuff you got, you're toast. You got to have a backup of your database. But the database, the role that it plays is it's just kind of pointer to a bunch of stuff. So there's not a whole lot of data inside of the database, but it's a bunch of pointers to where the data is, and the data is sitting inside of blob files. What's really cool about the architecture of retain is any component, anything inside of a message is just an external blob file that gets spun out, and what's really powerful about that in retain is the single instance storage. There's just tremendous efficiencies that you get in retain because of this whole blob file architecture. But anyways, that's your message body content, your attachments, and so forth. Those are in blob files, and the architecture of retain is really very future-proof in the notion that these blob files are spread amongst 16.7 plus million directories. So that's a really cool design. It really makes sure that because sometimes you have problems where there's limitations of how many files you can put in a particular directory and so forth. And so because of the 16.7 million directories, those blob files, you're just not going to have any limits as to how many blob files you can restore. And so retain is really written and designed to scale in a massive way. Okay. And then the third thing that we want to talk about is the indexes. Now, indexes are not a crucial component to retain, but they are important. In fact, one of the main reasons is that they're so important is if you had to rebuild them, it'd take quite a while. Now, that said, in Retain 4.1, they've made some massive improvements to the indexes, and Retain 4.1 recently came out. So that's really nice. But still, nonetheless, you don't want to have to rebuild those indexes, and so that's the primary reason to back them up. If you lost them, it wouldn't be there. It's not critical data, but it's important data because you don't want to have to rebuild them. Okay, so that's the architecture of retain, and we've talked about these points. Need to back up your database. Okay, I can't emphasize that enough. Please, whatever your database is, back it up. In fact, another thing to consider is a master-slave architecture. I helped a customer with Reload for Retain implement this architecture where they've got a MySQL database, and the master is on the Retain system, and the slave is over on the Retain system that's housed on the Reload server. And so what's neat is the database is effectively replicating itself. There's, Reload for Retain doesn't have to do a thing. MySQL takes care of it by itself. But now you have this replica of your database that's, automatically, replicating for you with no effort, and that becomes a backup. Now, I still would recommend in that kind of a scenario to get a dump of your database for safety purposes, because if you had corruption in your master, you would get corruption in your slave. But still, nonetheless, it's a really, really neat architecture, and if you combine that master-slave architecture with a feature that we'll talk about a little bit called mirroring inside of Reload, you now have, a completely, entirely replicated system that's 5 minutes, old compared to the live system potentially, and maybe even less, but 5 minutes or less old, and your system's fully replicated. Really powerful stuff. Okay, so we talked about the database. Backing up the retain archive data. Okay, the archive data must be backed up. Okay, now the challenge to backing up the blobs is, remember we talked about the 16.7 million directories. Okay, the challenge that a lot of backup software has is two things. Is the fact that it has to root around 16.7 million directories. I don't care how fast you are, how fast a processor you got, whatever. If you've got 16.7 million directories to contend with, that's going to be a lot to deal with. Now, there are solutions. In fact, I had one day in which I was doing some follow-up on a Reload for Retain webinar, and I called multiple people, and truly every single customer that had a backup solution, okay, there were some that didn't have any backup solution, but every single customer that had a backup solution, they were using Commvault, okay? And universally, they talked about that, okay, some had implemented Commvault in such a manner that Commvault would try and track the changes to the disk and immediately replicate them, which is really an ideal situation, okay? But the problem was it degraded the performance of the retained system so much that now your backup and disaster recovery solution makes a system that's becoming increasingly critical to people because it's becoming more and more user-facing, okay? Now that it's degraded so much because your backup solution's sitting there constantly having to keep track of what are all the operations to the disk, spread across 16.7 million directories, okay? So programmatically, that takes a lot of resources. So we had that camp with Commvault, and then we had the other camp that hadn't implemented Commvault in that manner, and it was having to scan the 16.7 million directories. And again, doesn't matter how much power you got, that's going to take a long time. 16.7 is a lot to iterate through. And so the backups can be very, very slow or impact the live system adversely, okay? So that's the challenge when it comes to backing up retain is the database, that's no problem to back up. The index is really not too big a deal to back up. The blobs, that's the big deal. That's the reason for Reload for Retain, okay? Just like when Reload for Retain first runs, okay, it will run for quite a while. In fact, I had a outfit out in Africa, and this really isn't representative of the software, it's really representative of the hardware that they have out there, but it took a month to get that initial backup, okay? But then incrementals are, very quick. It'll take it a while to get that 16.7 million directories. Why? Because one, there's 16.7 million directories to iterate through. Two, I don't want to degrade the performance too much, so I'm very, very cautious. Three, I always check the work, my work, and so it's kind of a double check or triple check because I'll never ever do it again when we do a backup of your retained system. And so we got to make sure we truly got a good backup that very first time. And so that's how Reload for Retain backs things up the very first time. After that, it goes to the database in order to discover which blobs it needs to back up. And 50,000 blobs, you can back that up, in 10, 20 minutes. And when I say 50,000 blobs, let's say on a given day that you have, 50,000 messages or whatever that come in, that isn't hard to back up. It's trying to discover where they are when you can't go to the database and ask the database where the files are, and that's what Reload for Retain does. That's the secret sauce, okay? And then the retain index files, we've already talked about these. So that it's important to back them up, and it's crucial to back them up if you want to properly, challenge your backup system. So, but important to back up in general. Okay. So we've already talked about this. How are things backed up with Reload? First backup is the old method of full backups. Successive backups use the integrated method, where we go to we do a database query versus file scans. And then here's the other thing that other backup software deals with that Reload for Retain doesn't have to deal with, and that is when a backup software approaches the archive data, not only does it have to say, gee, is this item new, but it also has to say, did this item change? Now, because I understand retain, and because we make retain, right? Because I understand retain, I go, well, there's no reason to ask that question. Nothing ever changes. Okay, the blob files don't ever change, and so we don't have to, look for an archive bit or whatever it is, whatever mechanism, or or a date change, or whatever, in order to determine whether or not to back up the item. If we backed up the item, we backed up the item. We never have to go back to that item again. Okay, so super powerful. The fact that we don't have to do that. So if you've got a MySQL system, Reload for Retain is a 100% backup everything kind of solution for you. If you're using MySQL or Oracle or Postgres, you've got to look at commercial solutions for that. Now another thing that we do is when we back up the blobs, we also challenge the blobs in this manner. We go, hey, first off, when we send the blobs off from the retain server over to the reload server, okay, so I never explained that component. You have a retain server and then you have a reload server, and on that reload server you also are retaining a retain software installation, okay, so you're hosting that also. But anyways, so it's a complete copy that's going on. But what happens is when the the items are backed up over to the reload server gets a manifest, and the manifest says, hey, I sent you all of these blobs, would you check it off your manifest list? So think about this. I used to be in a shipping and receiving at a small software company, actually a software sales company years ago when I was like a teenager, and I was the warehouseman, and when we would get packages that would come in, we sold software to all kinds of schools and so forth primarily, and so something would come in, Reader Rabbit, or Carmen San Diego or whatever would come in from Broderbund software. I can't remember. Anyways, that was another lifetime ago. But anyways, they'd come in and I'd have to sit there and I'd have to say, okay, that came in, that came in, that came in. Oh, that didn't come in. You know what I mean? And so I'd have to go down this manifest or a packing list and see what came in. Well, that exact same architecture, I just leveraged that same kind of idea in Reload for Retain. So not only does data get backed up, but it gets checked to make sure if it doesn't, that it gets backed up. And if the reload server doesn't get it, he says to the other side when the backup goes on next time, he goes, you know what, I'm not going to advance the timestamp. You need to go back and you need to do this again, okay? And so that'll cause the next job to, do probably twice as much as it did, would on a typical day. So it's going to take a little longer, and he's going to go back through and try and resend all of the items, and be sure that those items got across. Another thing that it does is there's a randomized blob test that it does. So basically what happens is every time the agent, which is running over on, against the data on the retain server, every time it runs, it goes and it does, by default, 1,000 random tests. So basically what it does is it goes to one of the directories, one of the 16.7 million directories, says, okay, what's in here? Okay, we got these 5 files. Okay, what's in here? Well, we got these 8 files. Okay. And he sends that up over to the reload server that's, that it's being backed up to, and he then checks off, yep, got that item, these randomized files that have come in at any other time, could have been years before, but it just says, yep, I got that, I got that, I got that. And if there's a failure on that, there's a couple mechanisms that it has. It can notify you, it can basically tell the agent, hey, you just kick off a full backup, because if we're missing one item, just one item, okay, that you randomly found, and we can't find it, who knows what's missing if there's 16.7 million directories, okay? And so let's kick off a full backup. Okay, okay, back to indexes. We're a complete backup solution for your retain indexes, okay? Now, another really cool thing is this notion of software mirroring. I've kind of talked about it, but here's the idea. what happens is if you turn on the mirroring agent inside of the reload for retain agent software, you still, a backup still goes on, whatever interval that you want, but this mirroring goes on where it queries the database every 60 seconds by default. You can set it to whatever you like, but it queries the database. It's a very, very simple query that goes down in a pre-established index that's already in retain, so you don't have to establish any special indexes. So it goes down this index, and basically the index tells him whether or not there's any new blob files, and if there's new blob files, he goes, oh, okay, something's happened. We need to replicate data, and so it replicates those blobs, and it replicates any modified indexes too. And then you can mirror that data to, that same mirroring agent, and can replicate to 3 other servers, okay, or 3 servers basically. And so that's a super powerful feature. So not only mirroring to 1, but 3. So okay, and so we talked about mirroring, and so this just kind of shows the capacity to replicate to multiple locations. And part of the reason I think that that's important is when people consider this, if you had a problem in your server room and the sprinklers went off in your server room, your reload server that's hosting your retain system that's been backed up, okay, could get just as wet as your retain server, okay, if it's all in the same data center. So, why not consider putting a reload server in another location? In fact, Bob, I'd love it if you put it in their cloud, if you backed up to their cloud, or, to a partner cloud is another idea, okay? So you also have push button disaster recovery. We're going to demonstrate these things, okay? And auto import of your retained database if it's MySQL, sorry. And your backups are immediately usable, okay? All right, so let's get out of this slideshow, and I'm going to close that down, and I'm going to come back over here, and I just want to see if this finally, now I don't know what's going on with retain. So okay, but let's just show you here for a minute, okay? I'm inside of my mailbox here. I'm just going to say, show me stuff from the last 3 days. Okay, so you see this message here, first test message, okay? So this is the retain system that dredges off of the email system that I have here, okay? So you see this first test message. I sent this earlier today, and then I kicked off a retain job, and it dredged it out, and there's the item, okay? Now, I'm going to show you, let me just let you see this architecture. So here's the retain server, here's the reload server, and in fact I have yet another reload server. I have 2 reload servers. So this is like an on-site server, and this is an off-site server, okay? All right, so this on-site server, I've designed it that he says, hey, when this system's using MySQL, so I've designed it that I said, hey, when you get a backup coming in to you, go ahead and import that MySQL database. Now, I'm fortunate. This is a rather small system. I had a customer, a larger system, that their import of their MySQL database would take 40 hours. And so it's not like every day they were getting their database in. And so for those kinds of customers, I'd recommend doing a master slave. But nonetheless, my import of MySQL database takes about 14 minutes, okay? And so what I've got here is I'm going to show you here, I've turned on some features. There's a feature called auto reload. So it's the idea that we're going to import in that database, and we're going to automatically load up the retain server over on the reload server. So let me just show this to you here, okay? You notice, okay, sorry, oh, I know what my problem is. Okay, and I was blaming it on retain, and it's me, it's the operator. I was looking at the wrong retain system. Okay, all right, this is the actual retain system that dredges off of the group-wise system here, okay? All right, so it's at this IP address of 72, okay? and this is the worker. Okay, so if I had just gone here and I'd gone to schedule and initial, and so, you know, here I was blaming retain, and then I gone here and I go here and I say refresh job cache now. If I go to status here in just a moment, it'll say yes, and it will okay, it went so quickly. Okay, retains incredibly fast. Okay, see, it's 12:34 right now. Okay, you notice that it archived those items. Okay, inside of retain. And so if I go here and I go to search messages and I go to my mailbox, see that? Here's a message. Now, unfortunately, the backup, the import of the MySQL database and so forth would run us out to the end of the webinar, and I don't want to do that. But I want to show you that this item that, I sent at 10 a.m. today has been fully replicated over here to this retain system that's hosted on the reload server. So let's just help you to see these IP addresses. Okay, here's the retain server. This is like my primary retain server. Okay, and this is this secondary retain server, really, I guess is another term we could give it, that's sitting hosted on the reload server. The data is replicated over to it vis-a-vis reload. And so if I go to search messages and I go to mailbox, look at that. There's that message from this morning. I can open it up. Okay, there's the content, and I even put in a attachment. Sorry, let me open that up. I even put in, sorry, this is really big. Let's squeeze that. Okay, so here's this file, asconfig.bad, and if I just open that up, select a program. Okay, I'm just going to take it into Notepad++, my favorite little editor. Here we go, and here's that file. So here's what we've done. We've challenged our backup. Okay, this is the really important thing that I wanted to get across is we've now demonstrated that we have a backup that we can challenge. The database is fully replicated over here to, you know, this secondary system. The blob, okay, this is a blob right here. This is a blob, is fully replicated. And here's the best part is, what if I try and do a find? So I'm going to sit here and do a search, Control-V, and bada bing, the find worked too. So here's what I proved. The database has been replicated because I'm querying against that database. Okay, I'm not querying against the live database. I'm querying against the MySQL database that was imported over here on the retain system hosted on the reload server. Okay, so that's the database. The blob, I showed you those blobs, and then the indexes have been replicated because if I didn't replicate the index, I wouldn't be able to find the item. And then of course here I can go into the item and it shows me these things that are highlighted. So really, really powerful feature. Again, this is my live server. This is my secondary, you know, replication of, you know, the retain system. And I want to show you here, okay, I think I've architected this one exactly the same way, or I haven't. Okay, I think this one, what I did, let me look at the agent log here, and yeah, okay, this is a system that I don't use as much, and so you can see it's got some weird errors and so forth. So I'm going to not act as though that system's up and running because I didn't play with it before I went to do a demonstration today. I use all kinds of test systems and stuff, and they're in different states. But you can see then that everything's been replicated here, and if I've done things right, it's been replicated over here. Now, here's another nifty thing is let's go here and turn off. Okay, there's two different modes that you can use the retain system. There's what's called use the local retain server, and then there's what's called disaster recovery. Okay, now the value to that, you know, you might go, well, what's the difference? But the value to that is you could actually design it where they're using different databases. So for example, in a disaster recovery scenario, if I was using a master-slave version of the database, in the disaster recovery piece, I would say, hey, use this, the slave version of the database. Whereas when I use the local retain server, and again, all of this is configured under here, local retain settings, and then the disaster recovery is here. But I could end up using two different databases, one that that I use that's an import and one that's a slave. And so the disaster recovery might use the slave version, whereas the retain system, the local retain system, might just be an imported dump file from MySQL. Okay. Okay, so anyways, let's show you push button disaster recovery here. Okay, so here's all that I need to do to enable disaster recovery. Okay, I click a button and then it has a little counter. It says, hey, wait for about 5 minutes for the retain server to load. And again, this is a retain instance that's running on my reload server. So I could completely annihilate this instance of the retain server. I won't, but I could completely annihilate it. It can be completely down, dead and gone, and I've got a retain system. Sorry, this is I've got a retain system that's up and functioning fully over here. Now we've got to wait for, with this system, it takes about 2 or 3 minutes, and then when we click on this button, we will see the option to log in, and we'll do that, but we'll just wait here for a minute. Let me just get rid of that. So super powerful push button disaster recovery in an environment in which you have MS SQL or Oracle or whatever it be. You would go in when you configured your disaster recovery, you would indicate the IP address for the MS SQL database that you want and the credentials to get there, and so that's how you would get connected to an MS SQL database or Oracle. Okay, it's still starting up, so we're still loading that. So you just can kind of see what happens is when we turned on disaster recovery. Okay, here we go. Enabling disaster recovery. Okay, running retain server software. Okay, that's what's going on currently, and so we're just waiting for that to finish. It's probably done. Oh, it hasn't finished yet. Okay, so I told you it takes about three minutes or so for that to come up. Okay, so we are challenging the data, and I'm just looking back at my notes and see if there's anything else that I wanted to present. Here we go. Okay, all right. So now I'm logging in, and I'm going to search messages, and there we go. And in fact, you even see, this message. Now, you might go, gee, well, how'd that happen? This is that message at 12:06, right? And the reason you're, okay, now we're having a technical problem. Let me just see. Okay, that came down. I wonder if someone else is logging into my reload server and disabling stuff, or okay, let me try this again. I'm not the only one that has exclusive access to these, so someone might be doing something. Let's just go here, enable disaster recovery. Okay, it's going to take it another 5 minutes or so, and then we can log in just as we saw before and see this fully replicated retain system that's hosted here on the reload server. So while we're waiting for that, I want to take any questions that we might have, and then we can come back and demonstrate that to you. So do we have any questions so far, Q?
Yeah, there's one that came across. It is, do you have a full separate retain server on the reload server?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, that's the architecture. What we do is first off, it's as though you have You know, it really is. It's just a complete copy, and it's going to take us, for customers in a MySQL environment, it's going to take a little bit more disk space than your existing retain system, because you know, depending on how long you keep those MySQL dumps, those take a little bit of space, and so you need, you know, basically all the disk space that you require on your retain system is what you're going to require on your reload system, and a little bit more space for the indexes too, because you can have potentially multiple copies of the indexes until such time that a full sync goes on. It's stuff that's you don't ever see, but it's just be aware that you will need a little bit extra disk space as far as the indexes go. So yeah, when you go to implement reload for retain, the very first thing that we have you do after installing the reload component is we have you install retain on that same server, and then reload then understands how retain is configured. It reads stuff out of the AS config and so forth, and it takes and it merges. It says, hey, you know what, here's where the indexes are, here's where the blobs are, here's the database and so forth, and modifies the AS config. If you're familiar with that in retain, it modifies the AS config that's sitting over on the reload server, not your live system, but on the reload server, to marry it with the how the backup is structured, and where the data is located really on the reload server. Okay, so if you went and you looked at the data set, it looks very much like retain, but retain is rather flexible. You can put your indexes here, and you can put your blobs there, and your database is up here. And so retain is extremely flexible, and so because it's flexible, reload can say, hey, here's where I keep the indexes, and here's where I keep the database, and here's where I keep the blobs, and that's how it's architected. So yeah, real good question. And now we're going to go back in. Okay, all right. So admin, Guava, and we're going to go to search messages, mailbox. Here we go. Okay, so this is pretty cool. This is that that item from 1206. Okay, that came across. Okay, so this is the item that we tried to send at the beginning that ended up coming across, and so that's why we're seeing it here, because we jiggled the handle and so forth. And so this is the fully functional retained server. This one can be down. Now, in a DNS environment, probably what you'd want to do is you'd want to switch your DNS address so that your users can discover your retained server now hosted over here. Okay, so we've now demonstrated, every, aspect of this, and in fact, let's do another search here so you can observe this. Let's go to search, and we're just going to take some random thing, okay, and OG. Okay, let's go back to browse. Let's go to mailbox, and let's try that again. I'm thinking I should be able to find this in the search. Here, let's do this. Let's do, well, that's pretty, yeah, this is, let's do that. Okay, that's going to be unique, right? So let's do search. Gee, I'm crossing my fingers that the, oh, gee, okay. So we're, you're going to have to trust me. This usually works. so I've obviously disrupted the demo gods twice today on something, but and you saw earlier that we were able to search for items. So why we can't search for them right now, I'm not sure. Maybe something's still in flux and being backed up. I'm not sure, but that's generally you would be able to search for that item. I just want to see if I can search for something a little bit more generic and do that. Nope. So searching right now is not available to me. Browsing is, and I would have to troubleshoot why that is, but I don't want to do that in front of you. But what I would do is I'd go and I'd look in the log and see if it says that there's some kind of problem. It could be that what's happening is There's a transitory state to the indexes during the time of replication. And it could be that that those indexes are still in this transitory state, okay? And so, it could be that I'm just waiting on that transitory state to change, because you notice that this item did get replicated across, and maybe the indexes are in the midst of it right now. So, okay, other questions, Q?
Yes, it looks like we have a few more. Do you have a separate database server for retain on the reload server?
Okay, good question. So in this scenario, I do. And the reason is because reload for retain allows you to define here. In this scenario, I'm using a MySQL database. So you see this right here, no, sorry, that's not the one. Auto reload MySQL database backup. Okay, with this feature enabled, when the reload for retain agent backs up the MySQL database to this reload for retain server, the MySQL database will be automatically imported as its own standalone, fully replicated copy of the original MySQL database on the production retain server. Okay, so when you enable that, that's what that does. So yes, in my scenario, if we were to think of this, the database as, a bucket, okay, I have a complete copy of that bucket over here on the reload server. Okay, it's sitting here on the reload server, and that's where my MySQL database is. Now, that said, I could have, I'm going to turn off disaster recovery here for a minute so you can see this handle. I could easily have gone in here. Oh, that's my problem. Sorry. I had another demo, and when I was working on the other demo, I didn't have a chance to kind of get ready with my stuff. Okay, let me just quickly show this to you here. See how it said 72? Okay, well 72 is my original system. So I was using 72 as my database, okay, and not 73, which is the local database. So now I'm going to turn on disaster recovery. So, and then I won't have that scenario where I find the item and can't search for it, okay? Anyways, you could very well do that where you say, hey, your database isn't local, it's this MySQL database over here, or this MSSQL database, or this Oracle database, okay? That's the database that you query against, not a local database on the reload server. And so all of the customers that are using MSSQL or Oracle, they'll be indicating a database that's likely to be over on a database server and not hosted on the reload server. Because I'm MySQL, it's hosted on this local reload server, okay? So good question. Q?
The next one is reload for retain 2.0 available?
It is. It's shipping now. It's been shipping for a couple months. Yep. Good question.
Great. And that looks like all the questions I have right now.
Okay, great. So I apologize for having a couple missteps here. Like I said, I had a different webinar before that, and you know how you got to get all your little test systems in place, and and so I was so focused on that other webinar that I just assumed I had everything in place on this, and I didn't, because I constantly test and fiddle with this, and so we're now observing here that this is coming up, and so we'll just wait for that to come up, and then I can demonstrate for you searching and so forth. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I should share while we have a little bit more time. Just an FYI, gee whiz factor, technically you can replicate your data to 60 other reload servers, okay? The design allows for that. Don't know why you'd want to do that, but nonetheless, you could do that. And your backups, typically, your typical architecture is that your backups go on, once a day unless you're doing mirroring. The backup routine is very fast. Except for Okay, after retain rebuilds indexes, typically we've told people to recreate their indexes, not recreate, sorry, optimize their indexes in retain once a week. And so after that optimization, that backup routine, which typically goes on the weekend, that backup routine takes quite a bit longer when it comes to replicating the indexes. Everything else is normal, but the indexes, it takes quite a bit longer. And the reason is because in Retain 4X, the indexes aren't, when they get optimized, they're not the same file. They're a completely separate file. And so we have to replicate the indexes in their entirety. And I've seen customers with indexes that are like, a terabyte. And, a terabyte's a terabyte, and that takes a while to replicate. And so that's, something that you'll observe. Okay, so now let's cross our fingers. Hope Tay's done everything right here. Okay, and we go to browse. Here we go, and we go to the mailbox. Okay, all right. So now we're only being presented with the stuff inside of the database that's over on the reload server. So you'll notice that we're not presented with the stuff that that I sent at 12 a.m. because we didn't kick off a backup. Okay, but I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to search. I'm going to do Control V, and dang it, I'm having some other kind of a technical problem, and but you're going to have to trust me, it all works. And it all works with very large systems. I was really excited that bank the other day, a couple weeks ago, we finally got their secondary reload server. So they have a primary reload server that's on site, they have a secondary reload server that's off site, and we can do searches in both systems for a very large system, and everything's fully replicated on both of those. I've obviously munged something up here, and I'll figure it out after the webinar is done. Well, folks, thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to even call you if you'd like some follow-up questions on this answered. I'd be happy to help you implement a demonstration version of it, and I've got customers that I'm doing that with. We have customers that are very, very satisfied with this solution, and customers both in Europe and North America and even all the way as far out as Africa using this solution. So hope you enjoy Reload for Retain and push-button disaster recovery and so forth. And till we speak again, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everyone. And yes, this webinar has been recorded, so look for an email with the link to the recording, or you can also go to youtube.com/guavatv to access that. And also, if you want any other information or would like a quote on how much reload for retain would cost, feel free to visit us at guava.com, and you can get a quote at guava.com/quote. So thanks, everyone, for being here and for your interest in this webinar. Thank you.